Hello, welcome. In this video, we're going to be discussing three different works: Identity by Kara Romero, Savage by Lisa Jackson, and Under Your Always Light by Leanne Simpson. The three works are all different artistic approaches to multiple key aspects. Identity takes on a documental approach where Romero is open to share her ideas on her photography and where her inspiration comes from. Whereas Savage by Lisa Jackson takes arguably a short film approach, or some may say a music video approach, where both music and style play a big role in her message. Lastly, Under Your Always Light by Simpson is more of a cinematic short film filled with drama and suspense. Romero, Jackson, and Simpson's depiction of identity are examples of how the world around one defines not only how they view their own self, but more importantly, how one's past is inspiration for the generations that follow. First, we're going to begin with Identity. Identity is, in itself, a documentary. More importantly, its photography with a purpose, as quoted by Kara Romero herself. Now, we can examine this in different ways. The way that I'm going to approach this is actually the way that Romero uses her photography in order to convey meaning, most importantly through her photograph Noemi, or a depiction of what an American Girl doll would look like. Now, the importance of this doll comes not from its traditional wear and its aesthetic, but rather the message that is conveyed through these styles. It is an expression of culture through America's standpoint, and it is a definition of open culture within a community that otherwise will shame you on who you are. Now, fast forwarding into Identity, Romero mentions this idea of indigenous worldview and how she uses Photoshop to convey this meaning of magic and galore. Now, what may seem a bit weird for some is actually a culture that has and continues to be shunned and pushed aside. The meaning of an indigenous worldview through Photoshop does not mean using it as a spectacular magic provider, but rather using it as an identity through one's culture and using the stylistic styles of Photoshop to convey different meanings, to provide a different example of what otherwise would be considered mystic or fantasy. More or less, it's the photographer's contribution to an art style. Now, more importantly, the whole idea of identity comes from Romero through the way that she brings representation through her nephews, the way that she upholds tradition, upholds her traditions and heritage. More importantly, it comes down to passing down education, not only through her nephews and her family, but through those who will see her work, as listed above and as can be viewed. Romero's style is not only fantasy and beauty through Photoshop, but also an explanation of what culture and what identity is to one, and the importance of continuing these traditions and teaching our children to uphold their heritage and how that will be their identity and how they need to pass these things on. Savage by Lisa Jackson actually takes the same approach, especially a little bit more clear in the way that she sets up the school scene. Savage believes that identity is done through our children. The way that we are defined is the way that we define our children, which means that tradition is lost when it is not taught, which is a reason that Jackson sets up a school, sets up an area where otherwise indigenous people have been harmed, where they have been forced to forget their identity and conform to a society that does not necessarily care for them or where they came from. The school is a symbol for lost education. It can also be a symbol for lost heritage. The depiction of children is how we solve our identity. It's an example of how our identity is portrayed not only through our heritage, but the way that we explain this to our children. Overall, the line "come back to me" within this work, one of the few lines, is the implication that we are afraid, that there is a fear that we are going to lose our children. Not in the sense of a kidnapping or anything else in that sense, but lose who they once were and who they should be. And in this case, it means holding on to what's one's true self, which is their culture, their heritage, their family. More importantly, is an allusion to the way that indigenous people were tortured and harmed through the education system, an allusion to early colonization. Most importantly, at the end, is a depiction of a zombie dance, where the children look lifeless. They look like they no longer believe in who they are, and they follow the guides that are given to them, which is where we lose our identity, which is where Jackson wants us to know that identity starts at home and it starts in the education that we give our children. Under Your Always Light takes on the approach of identity through children. The whole work is focused on demonstrating and symbolizing how one's decisions in their current life affect those who will follow them. More importantly, this is just as Romero and Jackson have mentioned, the importance of passing on one's culture and the importance of teaching one's heritage and educating not only their children but the world around them in order to keep these traditions and to uphold one's family's past. Under Your Always Light has two key phrases that I want to focus on. One is escaping, meaning that we must escape what we are now in order to provide for our children. May that be curses or assimilation in this case. Walking across the rocks is a symbolization for how our children, through our education and through our culture, will be able to learn. They will be able to transcend past the barriers that were placed in front of us, because they will be smarter, they will be stronger. Overall, the message is seen within the title and the repetitive line, Under Your Always Light, as it is an allusion to the parents that make us, to the grandparents, and those who have cared for us. It's a story of glory and triumph. The goal is to focus on identity and bringing oneself up. Overall, all three works focus on identity through their children, through their own self, and through their craft. Romero, Jackson, and Simpson depictions of identity are samples of how the world around one defines not only one's person, but how the past is passed down our stories.